everyone. All right, time to wake up. How's, do we have slides? We do. Do I have a clicker? Yes. How many, there's a lot of people here. How many of you are going to make some kind of a startup after this event when this is done? Could you raise your hand, please? Yeah. Wait, keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. How many of you are going to be one of those 15 startups every year that hits 100 million in revenue and deserves VC funding? More than 15. That's awesome. So this is a really good class. I made something which a lot of people don't understand is that these two companies that I have, Fog Creek Software and Stack Exchange, and I'm going to tell you that sort of just in chronological order to try to explain it. And there's all kinds of interesting lessons in there, I think, for different ways to create a startup and to bootstrap a startup or take funding. Almost every talk that I've heard today has assumed that you're going to be getting money from VCs. And there isn't enough money in all the VCs in California to fund all your companies. And so if you all kind of bang your heads against that door, some of them are going to get bloodied. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with metaphors. This is the very first Fog Creek office. Michael Pryor and I started Fog Creek Software in the year 2000. After we've been working together at a company called Juno Online Services, which was a free ISP. I never wanted to start a company. It wasn't, my lifetime goal. I was already in my mid-30s by the time I started Fog Creek. And, how old does that make me now? The point was that I couldn't find a cool place to work. I couldn't find a place where I wanted to work as a programmer. And I finally gave up on it and decided that if I was going to have a career that I found enjoyable as a programmer, I would have to build my own workplace. And of course, the irony is that I don't get to program anymore. But the very beginning of Fog Creek, we rented this office, and that was my desk. And I literally took home everything of the company in my knapsack at work at the end of the day for work. But I wanted to have a place to go to work. And it was me and Michael, and we hired a couple of people very quickly. Now, the reason we knew we could start a business, even though I'm kind of a scaredy cat and not an entrepreneurial type, was that I had seen a whole bunch of other businesses in those days. So this was the first dot-com boom, and this was sort of a period, much like today, when people were starting all kinds of idiotic businesses to sell grilled cheese sandwiches and whatever crazy, Instagram for squirrels, except it was called something else in those days. And all these idiotic companies, what you could do is you could look at them and say, wow, if I did that company and I just didn't do these two stupid things, but I did them in a smart way, then that would definitely be a better business than this one, right? So for me, the model was a company called Ars Digita, which was a consulting company that Phil Greenspan created, which collapsed after they took VC, but everything did really. And we were going to make 2 tweaks on the Ars Digita model. So he had this model that was like, we're going to do open source software and then consulting based on the open source software. And my tweak was it was going to be proprietary software and consulting based on the proprietary software. And then you'd have another source of revenue, was the theory. We were both wrong. It doesn't really matter what my theory was. We worked on that for about 15 minutes before we effectively pivoted to something else. But the most important part of our business model is we weren't going to spend any money until we had some consulting revenue. And so this was a time in the late 90s when there was absolutely unlimited demand for anybody who could put together, if you could type a less than and a greater than sign to make HTML on the keyboard, then you could bill about $200 an hour. And if you could actually make an HTML page, that was like double that. And there was sort of essentially infinite demand. There was a company called Scient, which fortunately is now completely gone. But in those days, they hired thousands of computer science students and stuff like that to build web pages for people. And Scient used to brag that they only accepted 10% of the clients that wanted to hire them. So if you wanted Scient to build your website, you had to apply, and then you had to get approved by the Scient board of whatever. So there was just way too much demand. And we thought, we'll just take some of that overflow of all that demand, build some websites for some people, make a few $100s an hour, with 2 or 3 of us, and build up enough money in the bank to basically bootstrap the business. And the truth is that worked for us. We had about 2 months of consulting, and I think we might have accumulated $250,000 in the bank or something like that. And that was really, really helpful. So we started in September 2000 in this very office. The consulting market, the dot-com crash occurred in November of 2000. And I know the exact month because in that month, if you look at all these consulting companies, there was Scient, Razorfish, Viant, March 1st, there was a whole bunch of them. And if you looked in November 2000, their billings went down by 90% in 1 month. And they didn't know it because they thought that this was just an unusual lengthening of the sales cycle, meaning it was taking longer to close new deals. They didn't realize that this market had completely collapsed. And they didn't really decide that the consulting market was gone and never coming back until April of 2001. And in the meantime, they had these big armies of consultants, and they burned through every penny that they had in the bank, paying these armies of consultants to do nothing because they had no clients. They had no clients because everybody got scared that the dot-com crash was going to happen and stopped hiring consultants to save money. Consulting market crashed. We had accumulated a little bit of money, and we luckily hadn't hired very many people. So we didn't waste all that money just keeping people employed when we had no money. We had hired a couple of people. We let them go. So it was just me and Michael for a long time as the co-founders. And we moved into this building, which conveniently my grandmother owned, and I was in charge of managing it. So I just sort of moved in and continued to pay her rent for a while. This was our office downstairs. And we continued to sort of build a business really, really slowly. And because there was no consulting business, what we started selling was FogBugs, because it was the only thing we could find, which is the bug tracking software written internally in VB script. And we started selling, FogBugs version 1.0. And, like the first day we sold it, there was like $2,000. Somebody bought a site license from Brazil or something. And it was awesome. And in fact, what we were noticing is, I think in the first few months, we were making somewhere around $5,000 a month, I think is the right number. And that was kind of enough to eat. And, eventually we paid my grandmother for all the rent that we were consuming. As time elapsed, the neat thing was that this number was going up every single month. And it was going up very slowly, but it was going up. And it was in a really, really bad market. But we were selling software. And it just got better and better and better because we worked on it. And our revenue went up to, when it hit $15,000, we could afford to pay Michael a salary. And I had some savings in the bank. So $15,000 a month is, I always just automatically calculate $10,000 per person that needs a salary, and all our overhead expenses, including the rent, was $5,000. So we then hit $25,000, and I started taking a salary. And when we hit $35,000, we hired a third guy who came on to start, answering the phones and doing some tech support and helping us with some of the coding tasks that we had. And at some point, we built actually got an office. This was, I'm guessing, about 2003, so like several years on. It was a really long slog before we got our first legit office. And we built it out really nicely, and we were always obsessed about giving programmers air-on chairs and 30-inch monitors and private offices with doors that close. And when we built this office, I think we had room, the first time we took this office, for 7 people. There were 7 desks. And eventually we doubled the space that we had there, and we made room for, I think, 12 people or something like that. And it was getting bigger and bigger. We all ate lunch together at this big table. These are a lot of summer interns. We took summer interns every summer, and that's how we got our recruiting pipeline. And again, Fog Creek just continued to grow, and this is the last time I remember getting the company together for an all-company picture. But I think we're now at, let's say, 40, 45 people. So that's one kind of company, and that's Fog Creek. Fog Creek continued to do well. We continued to sort of try to launch new products every single year. We had this idea that bug tracking was not really the be-all and end-all of products, and we launched a bunch of stuff. We had a bunch of summer interns launch a remote desktop product called Copilot. That did pretty well. That actually more than paid for itself, and now earns us sort of a nice dividend. FogBugs was obviously the big breadwinner and is now a very large product. And we launched a bunch of other stuff. Some of it worked, some of it didn't work. We launched a job board for the Indian programmers market and made 50 rupees total, ever, selling one job listing. That was the worst product we ever did. And then I wanted to do this thing, I wanted to kill Experts Exchange, which you all probably know about, right? Does anybody know Stack Overflow? Anyone heard of that? Stack Overflow thing. So the goal there was to kill Experts Exchange because they were evil. And what was cool about Stack Overflow is you could explain it that simply and everybody understood what you were talking about. You didn't have to go into any detail of how it would work. I couldn't find anybody internally that wanted to work on that, so I got together with Jeff Atwood, who's another blogger known as Coding Horror, and said, will you join us? This will be sort of a 50-50 Fog Creek, Jeff Atwood joint production to do Stack Overflow. And I kind of thought of this as sort of a side bet, like, let's get Jeff working on this. I'll help him when I can. If this thing takes off, awesome. If it doesn't take off, doesn't really matter, but hopefully I can get rid of this Experts Exchange problem. But the Stack Overflow did really well, as it turns out. The growth was incredible. Unlike the other speakers, I am perfectly happy to number the numbers on my y-axis. And I'll even tell you the growth here was insane from day one. We saw this, like, literally every single week we had more visitors than the week before. At the beginning, I think the numbers were crazy. We started out with like 30,000 daily visitors, and that's about the same number as people as I would get on a Joel on Software blog post. So I knew that was the Joel on Software audience coming initially. And over time, and that took 10 years to build that audience, by the way, writing a blog. You would look at the Google Analytics every single week, and it would just get a little bit higher. And of course, it went down on the weekends, and then it would just go a little bit higher. And at some point, it was growing by more than a Joel on Software like every week, and then it was growing by a Joel on Software every day. And it just grew faster and faster, and eventually encompassed the universe. Now at one point, when we were around 6 million on here, so this measure is global unique monthly visitors. That measures people that just visit your site once a month, and we place a cookie, and all we do is count the cookies on Google Analytics. So there's maybe maybe one person on two computers. The other thing about Google Analytics is that the cookie is placed on your domain, and we have 4 domains, so we have to break it down, and we may be double counting people that visit 2 of our sites if they go to 2 different domains, but I think that's okay, personally. And when we hit about 6 million users, we had a meeting with the folks in developer relations at Microsoft, and we said, hey, how many developers do you think there are in the world? They said 6 million. They said 9 million. And we're like, okay, we got 2/3 of the developers in the world. And then we hit 9 million, and then we hit 10 million, and then we hit 20 million. Now we're at about 25 million of the world's 9 million software developers, depending on how you read that number. So there's 2 kinds of businesses here that are completely different, actually. There are 2 ways you can build a business, and everybody up until now, today, and from Zuck onward, has been talking about the get big fast business, and Stack Exchange is indeed a get big fast business. It's growing. StackExchange.com domain is growing. And that's not going to work anymore, is it? The Stack Exchange